experiences, and resulted in the quality of life for improvements in the quality of life for tens of thousands of people. Now, this was especially remarkable if you think of the time, a time of brutal social engineering and resource deprivation for all people of color in South Africa. After retiring from the municipality in 1998, Joe began working at the profoundly important District 6 Museum, which we'll hear about later. For now, I just want to share with you a brief account of how Joe and I know each other. So, as a geography undergraduate in London in the 1990s, I had the great good fortune to be taught by the late, great David Smith, who wrote many important critiques of the apartheid system. His writings on what apartheid did to Cape Town, more broadly to South Africa, had a very powerful effect on me. So I really wanted to visit Cape Town to learn more. So I saved up and I went there for the first time in April 2004, 20 years ago this week. My first destination was the District 6 Museum. After taking in all the poignant displays, which Joe will tell you about later, I met Joe and we began a conversation. I asked him, where should I walk to gain a sense of what happened here, what was lost? And very generously, Joe said, well, I'll show you. So we walked together for about an hour through the ruins of District 6. And Joe taught me through everything in ways that were just extraordinary. It was a really profound moment in my life. Probably the best way I can describe it is like being mentally electrocuted. I remember saying out loud, I have to bring my students here. They need to meet this man. They need to learn from this man. Now, for various reasons I will not bore you with, it took me a very long time to make that happen. 12 years, in fact. Anyway, April 2016, I finally got permission to take University of Edinburgh geography students, where I used to work, to Cape Town. So on a trip to plan it all, 12 years after I first met Joe, I once again walked into the District 6 Museum. I was delighted that Joe was still there, barely looking a day older. I approached him and I said, I don't suppose you remember me, do you? I don't know if you remember what you said. So Joe studied me very closely, and there was a long silence, and he said, I don't forget hair that color. So I asked Joe if he would do the same for my students as he did for me 12 years prior. And he was instantly enthusiastic, as always, full of ideas. So for 4 straight years, pre-COVID, with my colleagues Jan Penrose and Julie Couples, I took between 30 and 40 undergraduates to Cape Town. And every year, Joe was just extraordinary with these students, most of whom were from very privileged backgrounds. It was truly life-changing for them to learn so much about place, community, housing, home, land, memory, inequality, power, resistance. I could go on, anti-racist struggles. I mean, so much they learned. So to recognize this, we nominated Joe for an honorary doctorate from the University of Edinburgh, and that was approved and awarded in July 2022. And it really hit home what this meant to the people of Cape Town, especially the people of District 6, when I learned that from the university technicians the following day after this ceremony, that over 50,000 people in Cape Town had viewed the live stream of that graduation ceremony. So Joe and I are now writing a book together on the history of the Bloemhof Flats, the municipal housing project where Joe was born and raised in District 6. And we're going to talk about that in an event here tomorrow lunchtime at around 1 o'clock. But in the meantime, today, this evening, you're going to hear the story of District 6 from Joe. So please join me in giving Joe a very warm welcome.
Okay, Tom, I will stand up here.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks to each and everybody that's watching us on live stream. I know some of you are lost sleep, but thank you for listening. And of course, I also want to say thank you to the Almighty for getting us here safely. And then, of course, to the Columbia, the Ivy League group. I could never have ever imagined that I'd be standing in the hallowed halls of this place, coming from the dusty streets of District 6. But thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Tom, for getting me to come out here. Although it was a 16-hour flight, I'm not going to complain about it. It's great. And of course, also, I must also thank the high school that I went to. I must say that, because Livingston High in Claremont was one of my mentors in teaching me how to be myself and not a number and not a color. Many of our teachers there Some of them were incarcerated, others were banned, but they taught me the wealth of who I am and what I am. And for that I say thank you. Then, of course, to one of my mentors, Vincent Colby. He used to be a librarian, and he taught me a lot, and even a hall in the University of Cape Town has been named after him for the work he did. And he even got me into radio broadcasting, by the way. And that was to play our local music, dance music, in a station called Bush Radio, which was the mother of community stations. And then, of course, he said, you've got to go and work at the District 6 Museum because of your knowledge, where you've been, what you've been through. And I thought, this guy must have smoked something because, I mean, what am I going to be doing? But he convinced me to go to the museum. And I wasn't sorry that I had gone there, because the museum was the other step up into me getting across to the rest of the world, telling what happened in as far as the apartheid legacy went. It wasn't easy times. It was tough. But I can tell you that, just an example, I had matriculated. And then, of course, one of my first jobs was an interview out in an area called Epping. For that, you had to get into 2 different bus groups. So I took the first bus, which was from Cape Town, which went as far as Mowbray. That was the City Tramways bus. Then from City Tramways bus, I had to jump over into a Golden Arrow bus, which took me to an area called Langa, which Tom alluded to earlier, which is a so-called black area. And then I had to get another bus from Langa to get to Epping. I did the trip, coming back, and had a very successful interview, feeling on top of the world, getting off the bus in Langa to cross over to the other bus to take me up to Mowbray. As I'm crossing over the road, a police van pulls up. And immediately a big burly policeman jumps out, but he's probably about 20 years old. But he's one of those real burly. And he looks at me and he says, "What are you doing here?" So I said, "Well, actually, just now, you are 18-year-old, you are scared, this is the police. Your nerves are shot already as it is." And he asked me, "Where is your permit to be here?" And I thought, oh, you're in trouble, because you're supposed to have a permit when you are in Langa. So I said, "Well, I'm not in Langa I had to cross over from one to the other." He says, "No, you are standing in Langa." Then, of course, my Livingston head kicked in. I said, "Well, thank you for letting me know where I'm standing, because I didn't know in the first place." Then he thought I was getting very smart. But fortunately for me, one of his warrant officers came past, because a crowd had gathered now, because they saw already, here's a so-called colored person being, pestered by a so-called white policeman. And he asked what is happening, but before he could speak, I took my papers and I said, "Man, I just went for an interview, and I'm just on my way home." So he looked at the papers and he turned to the chap and he said, "Are you being ridiculous now?" And of course, you don't do that to a white man in front of a person of color. And I thought to myself, "Joe, this is where you get out here, boy." And I jumped into my bus and I went. But that was the mentality. That was the mentality, because the whole thing went about that Nazi ideology of the supremacy of the master race, the white race, which should not be considered to be, they should be considered untouchable. And that is the type of thing we had to contend with through all those years of apartheid. And getting back to, of course, to District 6. Now you'll see right behind this huge building that's here, that used to be a station. Then behind that you see the castle. Well, they call it a castle. I've been to Edinburgh, I've been to Copenhagen, I've seen castles, but that is, okay, they call that a castle, okay. And that was built by the then Dutch East India Company as a refreshment station at a halfway station for the spice trade between Holland and the Far East. And all this here is reclaimed land, so the harbour was right up there where the castle is. And you, of course, being a port city, you had various people from different countries coming in. So you had Dutch, English, German, French, Portuguese. From our slave experience, people from Caribbean islands, Mozambique, Malaysia, Indonesia, Madagascar, India. The Jews that came from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Yeah, and Xhosa, and of course, Akoya and San folks. So there was a cultural mix, which over the years, of course, would have evolved into a religious mix. So we had Anglicans, Catholics, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, AME, Methodist, Moravian, Lutheran, Baptist, New Apostolic, Congregational, you name them. I could wrap this off you, but I won't. But the one thread that went through the whole of District 6 was the thread of respect for each other as people, and not because of your creed, your color, or your culture. And people learned to coexist and live together in a form of harmony. And I suppose I can bear testimony to that, because I was born in District 6, as Thomas said, in 1939, so you can work at the maths. Kicked out of there in 1967. And in all the time, I personally cannot remember any instance of either racial or religious friction. Tongue in cheek, we used to give each other crazy nicknames, yes. You're very tall, they're going to call you Shorty. Very thin, they're going to call you Fatso. Very dark, they're going to call you Snowy or Whitey. But all these were done tongue in cheek and never with any malice. And more so if you're in the sporting fraternity, like you have in US. Baby Ruth wasn't a baby, but there was some nickname. And this is what we did, and this is how people coexisted. Then along comes 1948, advent of the nationalist government coming to power. And when they came into power, along came what is known as the apartheid system. And as Tom had told you, the word apartheid means separation. And your separation was between white and people of color. And the whole apartheid strategy was based on your Nazi ideology of the supremacy of the master race, the white race, which should not be contaminated by people of color. And within this apartheid framework, there were various laws to govern this. Laws such as the Separate Communities Act, the Immorality Act, the Mixed Marriages Act, the Group Areas Act. And each one of these acts were geared to separate white from non-white, European from non-European. Yeah. Let me just go through this act in a very simple form to give you some idea of what it was like to live in that country during those apartheid years. Your Separate Communities Act meant anything that could be utilized by your general public. That means your buses, your trains, your taxis, your restaurants, your hospitals, your recreationals, your beaches, even your park benches would be in white, non-white, European, non-European. And it was an offense for either to sit in or sit on a space that was not designated for you. Your Immorality Act. It was okay for black and white to chat to each other. You can talk as much as you want to, as long as you want to. You can talk each other to death, as long as there's no hugging and kissing. Then it becomes an offense. Your Mixed Marriages Act meant absolutely no marriage across that black and white line. That was not going to happen. And then your Group Areas Act depicted where people of what color could stay. And on the 11th of February, 1966, this multicultural, interdenominational area known as District 6 suddenly became a white area. That meant that all people of color had to get out of there. Although in Cape Town there were 42 areas of forced removals, of which District 6 was the largest concentration of people being kicked out, where plus minus 60,000 of us were taken from the center of the city and then forcibly removed to the Cape Flats. And Tom showed you, and those are the notices. And this is actually from another place called Simonstown, but that's one of the other 42 areas that we talked about. And you can read it, what it says on that notice. And then we were taken from where we lived, and we were placed in those, what you call, townships. Townships which were based on your Nazi ideology of ghettos. But unlike those ghettos, we didn't have barbed wire fences and gun towers to keep us in. But after being racially divided, we were then entrenched in these areas by means of railway lines, highways, rivers, and industrial areas. And when they kicked us out to these distant climes, your salaries weren't increased, but your financial burdens increased because now you have to commute to wherever you're going. So what do you think is going to happen to people? They're going to get poorer and poorer and poorer. And as poverty sets in, so does depression. And with depression setting in, a lot of people resort to your drinking. Your drinking is followed by your drugs. Your drugs is followed by your gangsterism. That's why we're sitting in areas that you wouldn't even want your worst enemy to be caught up in. But unfortunately, this is where we're stuck in. Here we're showing you a picture called Richmond Street. On your left-hand side, you can see an extremely busy street. And on your right-hand side, you'll see a white building here. That's the Moravian Church. On top of the hill there, where those arches are, that is where these so-called white folk lived. On your left-hand side are the homes where people of color lived. And you can see the single-story, double-story structures. You can see a very busy street. You can almost hear the noises coming out of the street. On your right-hand side, that's Richmond Street in 1984. Only your church remains, and where these so-called white folk live. Everywhere else, total desolation, isolation, and silence. Because those people were shifted out into what is called the Cape Flats and put into those townships. And townships is not where you want to put your worst enemy, as I said earlier. And things haven't improved. It's really gone from bad to worse. And this is 1953, or City of Cape Town in 1953. And again in 1968, you can see areas being cleared already. This is 1977, you can see the large areas that have been cleared. And then 1983, that is your City of Cape Town, District 6. Now, as I said, this is where we were forced to go. Joanne doesn't know this because she wasn't born there. This is a place called Hanover Park. Well, now it's called Handover Park. You walk, they're going to hold you up. But it's Hanover Park, and that's a place we were forced to go into. And these flats and these places they put people into, some of them were so small you could even change your mind in it, never mind change your furniture in the damn things. That's the reality. When I moved into that block of flats, I couldn't get my bedroom with furniture into that place. No, I had to cut off the sides of the bed because it couldn't fit in. Otherwise, my wardrobe couldn't fit in. I could put in two wardrobes. The one at the foot end could open up, but the other one couldn't because it could only open up that much. And then you had to then put the other one, had to go and stand in a shed at the back. And when I moved into that place, I looked at it. And the walls were raw, but they were bagged with supposed to be whitewash. And I looked at this lot, and I thought to myself, I can't let my family live in a place like this. And then 2 or 3 doors away, there was a chap, I just managed to know him, because where you lived before, remember, you're living in areas that people have been living for 40, 50 years. There was a very strong community. Suddenly you were uprooted, and everybody knew everybody else. There was always Auntie Millie, Uncle Bill, Auntie Sally, Uncle John that you could go to. Suddenly you are uprooted, but you're not taken out as a community. Oh no, divide and rule. So individually you are taken out and you scattered among total strangers. So everything that's community-based is destroyed. Your families, your friends, your schools, your churches, your sports clubs, all gone. And you find yourself in isolation in a new area. Can you imagine what this did to people who are 70, 80, 90 years old? Where everything that's familiar to them is just torn away from them, and they find themselves amongst total strangers. Some of those old folks just gave up the ghost and they died. Others committed suicide because they couldn't understand how the color of their skin could subject them to this type of treatment. And like I said, when I moved into this place, I then decided, I met a chap 2 or 3 doors away, and I believe he was a painter. And I asked him to come in and have a look at my place. I'd like him to screen the walls, and I want him to paint it. And then I got some wallpaper, embossed wallpaper, which I put in there. And I then put in these little hanging crystal, the chandeliers type of thing. And people came in and said, "What, are you crazy? Why are you doing this? This is not your place." So I said to them, "Listen here, folks. When I come into this area, I'm coming into Hanover Park. When I shut my front door, I'm living in Bishop's Court or in Camps Bay. Don't let your place decide who you are. You get above this. Don't give your oppressors that opportunity." And at the back, I had a piece of ground. And then I went to, there's a farm nearby. I went to go buy compost, and I started tilling over this ground and started planting grass and started planting flowers. And again, the people said, "Are you crazy? Why are you doing this? It's not your place." Again, I had to give them the same answer. But once the grass started growing and the flowers started coming up, guess who started making gardens? Because all I needed was someone to lead. And that was important. They were feeling depressed, they were left down, and this I couldn't afford. And that is the reason why I had worked for a very, very big company, very big fishing company, where I was earning a very good salary. And that made up my mind. I'm going to give up that job, and I'm coming to work here. I then started working as a health inspector in those areas. I worked every depressed area there was in the city of Cape Town. And I can assure you, it wasn't an easy thing. And I worked in the most dangerous of areas with gangs and all that, but fortunately, playing sport and also playing in a band, they all knew me, so I could work. Never mind being assaulted, I wasn't even sworn at. And even during those times of riots and stuff, I was asked to go into those places where the places were the worst and get the doctors and the nurses out of the clinics and get them out. I remember one good incident, Tom, in Manenberg. Now, I was in the office, and then of course my radio goes off because we didn't have cell phones in those days. And I says, now I was Scalpel 1, Scalpel 6. Scalpel 1 was, of course, the medical officer of health. Will you please go up in Manenberg? I believe they've got problems up there. Okay, I took my car, went up there, and here was the whole crowd around this clinic with petrol bombs standing, and they wanted to burn the place. And there was a TB van there. And that TB van it was a mobile TB van. And I pulled my car up, and of course the guys gave away. They knew who I was. I would pull my car in. And I asked the guys what's happening. They said, "No, the people are threatening to burn the place down." So I turned and looked around. I said, "Now, where are the doctors and the nurses?" I said, "Okay, just get them out here." I told them to go. And I stood there. And the driver I remember him very well, Mr. Meyer, very dark-skinned, but he was grey with fear. And he said, "Mr. Schaffers, we're going to die here today." I said, "No, nobody's dying here today." I said, "I'm going to reverse my car against your butt, the truck. You're going to get in the truck, and you're going to follow me out of here. And I'm going to take you up to the main road," which I did. Took him up there, and he went through. I came back. Then I spoke to those guys. I said, "Look, now I can imagine, I can feel their anger. I can feel they want to set this place." I said, "Guys, if you set this alight, if you burn this out, you've got TB, you've got TB. You on a grant, you on a grant. If this is gone, that's all gone." Then the penny sunk in. They turned around and they left. But that is a situation that you have to face. And this happened in the so-called black areas also, where I had to go in and convince people from destruction is not going to help them in a case with your oppressors. You've got to learn to get above that. And I think that for 25, 29 years with the city council, I did that, and I got a lot of accolades for it, but that wasn't the point. The thing is, you were trying to save the people from themselves and to show them by example that it can be done. So that, I think, is why I found this museum to be the best place for me to get this done. And then, of course, yeah, yeah. Now, that's the District 6 Museum. That started it all. That started my career to come out here and do what I do. And what I'm not sorry that I did. Pay was never good, but the results were absolutely excellent. Here you can see the map, and that's where people came along. It's on the floor. And you can see people writing their names down as if psychologically wanting to reclaim that space where they used to live before. In the background there you can see there's a whole pillar there of names. And those are the street names of District 6. Where one of the chaps, Mr. Ehrlich, his job was to take down the street names and actually bury them under the rubble. But he in his wisdom kept some of the street names. He kept them for 20 years. We got to hear of it. And on the 10th of December 1994, we opened this museum called the District 6 Museum. And this museum was only supposed to open for 2 weeks. We are still there, teaching the rest of the world about forced removals and the apartheid system. And we asked people as they came in, there was a huge map, not actually a huge cloth called the memory cloth, where people had to put their thoughts and their ideas about District 6. Yeah, there's somebody working on it. And that was done stitching by hand by Ms. Gwai, that lady that worked there. And it was, their names were imprinted on those maps, on the cloth. And we should put that cloth edge to edge. We could probably cover a kilometer, if not more, on the thousands upon thousands of names and thoughts of people who are District 6. And nowhere will you find anything derogatory said about it, despite the government saying it was a slum, it was gang infested, and it needed to be cleared. And we know the real declaration for the clearing of that area was because of the value of the property. When you look at the sceneries, when you look at the mountains, when you look at the beach, and we look at the sea in front of you, and you look at the mountains in the distance, every area that was proclaimed as white area were areas of prime property importance. And what they then did was, they would make an offer for your property in those areas, that's outside of District 6 as well, which was way below market-related prices. Now, if you refuse to sell it, they would simply take your property, and that is known as expropriation. Then they would give you what they thought it was worth, which was even less than what they offered you in the first place. In our part of the world, it was known as expropriation. In US, it's known as eminent domain. And that story goes on and on and on. Fortunately, we're getting past that in our part of the world. But unfortunately, it hasn't stopped yet because we still got major problems. We've got District 6. We had this, Tom, can you show the queues there for the voting? Yeah. Here you can see people standing, getting ready to vote in 1994. And all the euphoria. We are free. We are voting for the first time. All that euphoria. What have we got? A democracy has turned into a democracy, quite frankly. Because you can see how people are complaining. What they voted for and whatever has not been achieved. And that is a big problem we're having with corruption and then dealings. And that needs to be overcome. All that aspirations that we had still hasn't come. You find there's still a lot of areas that hasn't been developed. And I won't even go into that now. You'll read it all in newspapers. I'm not going to go into that. But this is the reality of what we're experiencing today in this so-called democracy. And it's so sad to think that so many people died for this. One lady said to me, Mr. Mandela must be turning in his grave. I say, excuse me, he's spinning in his grave to think what they had fought and died for has not materialized. But then unfortunately I said, we haven't given up hope. It is going to change. And mindsets have got to change to make that country as one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and I always boast about it. Our sceneries are fantastic. Our foodstuffs is absolutely out of this world, as Tom can attest to. Our wines are even better. So when you come to South Africa, you don't leave there less than 6 kilos heavier than when you came there. So that is my contribute to this. And I sincerely hope that I was able to get something across to you. Yes, yeah. You can go to those.
Through them,
Yeah,
so let me
I
just
can
go
give you.
back to some of these. Sorry about the whizzing here, but
That's okay.
we'll get there. Here we go. District 6, okay. Why don't we start with
I'll
that?
see,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
playing cricket in the streets. That used to be sport, used to be a big part of our lives in District 6. Cricket, soccer, rugby. And you can see it's done in the streets. Where I lived in Bloemhof Flats, we played in the flats, in the quads. And, you know, there were windows all around. So, of course, a good hook to the right or to the left, the window's going to go. And, of course, that mom that's going to give, she's making a hell of a noise. But we had 4 or 5 guys that worked for the plate glass company. So before she could make a noise, the glass would be put in again, and the game could go on again. Quick, because we made sure that this happened. And of course, these balls get hit onto the roof, which is 4 stories up. And when you run out of balls, you have to go and retrieve those balls. Then you used to walk on the walls, and that was one of my jobs because I was tall, fill in those gutters and walk 4 stories up to get the balls out and throw it down so that the game can continue. Then we played soccer in those quads, and a lot of our soccer players and our excellent cricket players came out of those quads, came out of the streets of District 6. Bertold Oliveira, one of the top English cricketers who went over to England to go and play over there, he played for Worcestershire. He made the English side. And would you believe it, that when he was supposed to play, and he did so well, that when South Africa was supposed to play against England, England had to come to South Africa. South Africa refused to play against England because they had a colored man in the side. And that forever kicked out South Africa out of international sport. One little man who had no clue, had no truck about politics, but because of his art of playing cricket, he got South Africa, and that's when they started being kicked out of all kinds of world sports, and the world started banning South Africa for their sport. Here we have a building that's called Eaton Place, and one of our books written by a chap, one of our best writers, Richard Reeve, they use that as a model for the amount of people that lived in it and the different types of people that lived in that area. You see an area called, this is Mount Street, and the wall on your right-hand side is where the nurses' home was and the maternity home was. And you can see some of the buildings. At the back is Bloemhof Flats, and on the left-hand side, right on the top, on the left-hand side, that is where my wife used to live. And I lived 2 blocks away from that. So you can imagine it was a very cheap courtship. No bus space, no nothing, just across, going across. And that's my mom and dad celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, and that's my sister. And when the area was being proclaimed as a white area, I think it was too much for the mom and dad, and they just passed on. My sister left immediately for Australia, where she's been for the past 50 years, living the life out there. And this is District 6, and you can see the beautiful buildings we had. You can see the architectural work in these buildings. And remember, these buildings were built with the art of the artisan. They weren't built from what they do with molds and stuff. Each one of those buildings, each mold that was done with the skills of that thing. And these were all destroyed. Look at those railings. This could have been comparable anywhere in New Orleans, the types of buildings that we had. Your brookie lace fencing. Those are the people that this is a street called Lavender Hill. And the sad part about it is that there's an area, and they named it Lavender Hill to mock the people. That we've taken you out of Lavender Hill and we're putting you into Lavender Hill, which was in the Cape Flats. Those flats that I showed you, that is where people were forced to go. And that was the sick humor of the so-called nationalist government. You are moving out of Lavender Hill, but we're putting you into a Lavender Hill. Next one. Yeah, and then we're going to show a little video clip.
1960s. By the early 1960s, although it was a crowded inner city area, it had a vibe that is still spoken about today. This footage of the people of District 6 in the 1960s going about their everyday lives belies the catastrophe that was being planned. This is what District 6 looked like back then. Everyday reality was about to become haunting memory.
Yeah, on the left-hand side, you'll see a building with a little, almost triangular thing. That used to be a synagogue in those early years. And it was, of course, when the Jewish folk moved out, that building stayed there. And it became one of our jazz venues. They turned it into a jazz venues. It showed the music was always good. That was Abdullah Ibrahim playing the music, one of our sons of District 6. And he's, of course, internationally known here in US as well. And also Jonathan Butler. Music played a major part in their lives, and that's what kept us alive. It's like your slaves. It was music that kept them going. And that music kept us going as well. We had our minstrels over the festive season. So even in those difficult times, it didn't keep our spirits down. The music be a major part of our lives in District 6. And I played in a dance band, been in that for about a million years. And as I said earlier, that's how the people knew me. Also from standing in the front of wherever they had functions. Fundraisers were always done with dances, in most cases, and of course concerts. And a lot of our vocalists and stuff came through those fundraisers, through those concerts that were given, those talent contests we had, and that played a major part for us in raising people's spirits. Even after we were moved out, they started resurrecting those minstrels and stuff out in those townships. And I was pleased that they did that they just didn't wallow and die. We fought up and we stood up for it, and hopefully it'll carry on. And the spirit of District 6 will keep on moving, not only through District 6, but through every area in the city of Cape Town where people were forcibly removed out simply because of the color of their skin. And I always ask, what is this obsession with the color of skin? That's what I always ask my students. What is obsession with the color of the skin? Does it mean that some people who are lighter, they are brighter? No, not on my watch. Then why do we have this obsession? And I always say, I should take 40 million people from no matter which part of the world you come. I place you all on an open field. I ask you to prick your finger. What color is going to come out? Now, until we bleed in different colors, we come from one race, and that's the human race. So color of skin, texture of hair, bridge of nose, the size the way you are built means absolutely nothing. We have the same brain capacity. We feel the same pain. We feel the same anguish. So why do some people think they are better? And that's a mindset that's got to change. that we all come from one source. And it took all of us to develop the world to what it is today. And it went across the lines of the so-called color. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. So we have an opportunity for questions now. I mean, I've probably asked Joe far too many questions over the years, so I won't start that process. But I can see hands up already. There's somebody with a microphone, I think, going around. There's a question.
Oh, there's somebody coming out from there, inside there.
I think
they're going to bring a mic to you
There's
now.
a microphone there. There we go.
Is my voice okay?
Okay.
I thank you so much for speaking about your experiences. I think it was very needed, and I think it was just really beautiful hearing about them. I know you spoke a lot about how, or just like briefly at the end actually, about the role of music in creating a sense of purpose, or maybe just helping sustain that purpose. I was wondering if you could speak more about like the connections you might have made between music and place during your time in District 6. And
What's it on?
Talk about the connections between music and the place of District 6 over
Oh,
your time
okay,
living there.
certainly that's not a
Yeah.
difficult thing at all.
Mm.
How do you keep the music playing? Very simple. You keep on playing. No, music played a major part in our lives. Virtually most of the houses had either piano in it or a piano accordion, and your guitars. You used to be sitting on the street corners. We used to emulate and imitate every so-called American vocalist, and every vocalist we had our own Nat King Coles, our own Perry Comers, we had our own Tom Joneses. You could pick them up on the corners. They were all over the show. And I promise you, when there was a variety concert, you'd swear it was a real guy singing there, because that's how good the guys were. I mean, even me, when I played jazz, and I had one of our top pianists, Tony Shoulder, even Vincent Colby and all these guys, they would ask me to do the Sammy Davis songbook. That means starting Sammy Davis Jr. So you should do impersonations of various artists. And that became part of the fun for the evening, because you'd start off with Sammy Davis and Jerry Lee Lewis, and Jerry Lewis, and then going on to Billy Eckstein, going from one Billy Daniels, one to the other, and singing through that. But it was part of the way we lived. We lived at our musicals. If there was a show showing, where there was music, if it was a musical, that cinema would be packed, because people loved the music. And that's what made it important. Abdullah Ibrahim, you heard him playing the piano. He started out playing saxophone, and he wasn't even from District 6. He actually came out of a place called Kensington. But he came to District 6, and that's where he learned his jazz, his art. And that is what brought him to where he is here now. Him and his wife, Satima B. Benjamin, because they were actually personal friends of mine as well. I knew them both well. I knew the family well. So that is how music carried us through those difficult times. And it still does. Because difficult times aren't over yet.
Joe's being very modest, by the way. The jazz scene in Cape Town, which is an extraordinary thing to see if ever you visit the city. There's always an open mic session. There's so many jazz clubs. And a lot of that is actually due to Joe's efforts with his friends from District 6, right, to keep the spirit of District 6 alive through music in a way so the spirit of District 6 will never die with that music, and still permeate through the city in ways that obviously the place is gone, but you can't.
Yeah.
So, any more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yes, and
It's been 30 years since the end of apartheid, and you've got acres and acres of empty land next to downtown Cape Town. Why hasn't it been rebuilt in any fashion?
Well, one of the reasons is, as I said before, there was the word apartheid. That word died, it's off the books. But we've got a new word which has taken the place of apartheid, and it's called gentrification, which is the same thing. You can live where you want to, if you can afford to. And in most cases, you can't afford to go where the places are. But with District 6, we have this major problem, unfortunately, is unfortunately corruption, underhand dealings. Some people have moved in, and people ask, but why aren't there other places like this correctly asked, been developed here? And that has been a major bugbear for us. And you ask, why are they waiting? Are they waiting for everybody that left District 6 to die? Then the land become available? Then they can then sell it to your overseas market. Because that land is worth billions, not millions. Remember, it was millions those days, it's billions now. Can you imagine setting itself up a couple of one and only hotels there, or Commodore hotels, or any of those big hotels in that area, and you sell it to those? Can you imagine the money that can be made? And if you looked at the view that Tom had showed you, you look at the view across the bay, across the mountains in the distance, and look at the view behind you. Uninterrupted view of Table Mountain, Devil's Peak, Lion's Head, Signal Hill. All those beautiful views. People pay an arm and a leg for that. And that is a sad indictment of what I feel is still our big problem. That it's still that. And that should have been given back to the people who were kicked out of those areas. And we should insist that those people come back here.
There has been some restitution.
There's been some
But,
restitution, but Tom, not on the scale that we were kicked out.
Mhm.
There was still thousands of people waiting. A lot of us old folk hoping, and when I said the euphoria of 1994, yes, we're going back. No ways. No ways. And it's so sad to think that people have died waiting to go back. Some people have been fortunate to come back, but the vast majority are still stuck out there in that Cape Flats. Any other questions? Yes, my dear.
Thank you. This was emotionally moving and beautiful to hear. So you talked about how when people were moved, which happens most of the time with evictions, that they move in and they live next to strangers, and then it seems like. So can you talk a little bit how they ended up forming a new community? Because it seems like you started like the painter here, the people helped you set up the space. So how is it that people end up forming new forms of community and new relationships in places of eviction? And then how do they build connections for resisting, or at least right now what you're talking about, some form of reparations to go back?
Yeah, the thing is, you see, especially in places out there, remember the moment when you move in, you're totally in isolation. You're depressed. Where do you start? How do you start getting your life together? Just imagine where I lived before, just to give you an example. It used to take me 20 minutes to walk to work, 20 minutes to walk back. And then walking. Suddenly I land up in one of the places called Hanover Park. Your bus takes you an hour to an hour and a half into town. That's 3 hours of your day wasted sitting on your butt, traveling. Add to that the cost of traveling. Whereas before it used to cost me only shoe leather. Now imagine yourself having a family of 4 or 5, and your children are still going to school in town because all the schools aren't built out there yet. That means, and your parents start work at 8 o'clock in the morning. That means 6 o'clock in the morning. You've got to be on your way to get to your bus, to your work. The children come to school early, they have to wait outside until the school opens. But come 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, schools are out. Parents are still working until 5, 5:30. Your children become known as latchkey kids because they are now given keys to go home. But now home isn't 5 minutes or 10 minutes up the road anymore like it used to be. It is hell and gone at that side of the world. Can you imagine the anxiety on the minds of the parents, wondering if the kids are okay out there? Because remember, there's no cell phones. There's hardly any telephones. So the only time you know things are okay is when you get home. Whereas before, where we lived before, you had a community. It takes about 30 to 40 years to build a community. And they were solid communities. So there was always, as I said, Auntie Sally, Auntie Millie, Uncle Bill, Uncle John, the kids could go to if anything goes wrong. That's not there anymore. Because now you're among total strangers. Now, can you imagine that sort of scenario? When I lived in District 6, within 5 minutes, I could be in 5, 6, 7 different shops. The shops on every corner. The center of your city was 10 minutes away. Suddenly out there. Your closest shop is here, then about a kilometer away, another one. And then you have to navigate your way among total strangers. It's not people that you know. So that becomes high risk. You can't even send your children to the shop because they get robbed and mugged, because there's a different breed living in those areas now. So what do parents have to do? Either lunchtime or after work, they have to buy their groceries. Then they have to get into a full bus with other people doing exactly the same thing. And if you're getting off, you're living near the bus stop or the train station or the taxi rank, you're fine. But most of those people lived a distance away from that. And there's absolutely no shelter in those townships. So if you walk out by your front door, you hit the first sidewalk, you're already soaked. Then you still get to your bus. And if you haven't got dry clothing at work, you're going to be sitting with wet clothing on all the time. And coming home the evening, what do you think is going to happen to your respiratory diseases like your TBs, your bronchitis, your pneumonias, your asthmas, your cerebrospinal fevers? All those are going to escalate, which adds to your problem already, what you have to spend on medication. Now, can you see the pressures that were put on people? It's not a matter of just moving. It's all that included. And in winter, those places were like fridges. In summer, they were like furnaces. And some of those roofs were made of asbestos. You can imagine when they start chipping and flaking. Asbestosis and other. And that is the reality of living in townships. Any other questions? Yes, Maria.
You talked about the need for restitution for people
Yes.
who were displaced to be able to return to the land. And I'm curious if you could talk about what you see as maybe pathways towards that, because it sounds like formally having democracy has not been making that happen, right? And so what might be a way for that to happen that you think is promising?
Well, there is a restitution process that you can apply for. They have this. But like I said, it's such a schlep getting. And then, of course, you know, what they call it, when you have everything underhand done, your corruption plays a major part. And this is the other problem we're sitting with. You find in some of the areas, as I always say, and I become very facetious about it, they're letting out the places to builders. Okay, so it's builders. But in most cases, it's friends and families. So that's already the other side of corruption. So when you shut the front door, the back door falls off. That sort of scenario. And then there are cases where people have been given the monies, but they just disappear. And but never there. And you ask, what happened? Where's the guy? Why isn't he being picked up? Now, those are the type of things that we've got to be dealing with. And it's so rife. We have problems with water. I mean, you can read our newspapers. You can look at our Facebook pages. You can see what's happening in those areas. I'm not talking about it because I'm reading it from books. We're experiencing this. You're reading about load shedding. People heard about load shedding?
No, I think you'll have to explain that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Load shedding is because your systems have become so old that they collapse. Okay. That means then, for a period of time, you are then in different areas. You're only allowed so much electricity, so that you might be without electricity maybe for 2 hours, and the next area gets another 2 hours. That to bring the strain off from the load that's being, and they're supposed to be. But now if you're looking at, and this is my point, 30 years. Do you mean to tell me you didn't know that those things are going to go? Those pipes are going to go? Or that wires are going to be going? Where is your people that's supposed to be looking after this? They get coal. They get inferior coal. And amongst those coal, you get metal pieces and stuff to make up the weight of coal. And this has been discovered in so many cases. And that only goes into the machines as well. So we're sitting with those major problems. And I know it's a sick process, but hopefully, that sanity will prevail. And people will start thinking, no, this is not the way it should be. And that we should be looking at a better world, especially for people who've been subjected to the terrible apartheid laws and should be living a better life. And I sincerely hope and pray this will come about, even in my time, that things will develop. And I say for me, it's also not a matter of just doom and gloom. The younger generation are coming through. A lot of our younger generation across the lines of color are living or going to colleges, they're going to universities, they're learning this different breed of people coming out that's seeing what's happening, and they will ring the changes. And that is what I say. Our hope is in with the youth, and they should be changing it. They're already, if you look at some of the people that's in Parliament, they should never even been there, over 60, 70 years old. What are they doing there? There should be younger blood in there that sees what's happening. But unfortunately, this is what's going to be taken care of, and hopefully now with our new elections coming on, which is in this year, we'll see what happens, and maybe we get changes, and things will be differently. That's what I hope, and that's what we all pray for. Because as I say, we've got such a beautiful country, we cannot afford to let it go to pieces because of the bad element that's running it at this stage. Any more questions?
Hi, thank you so much for
Okay.
sharing. You just mentioned generations and kind of your belief and reliance on future generations, and I'm wondering if you're finding younger people engaging with District 6 Museum, coming to it, finding like solidarity in the memory of it, because a lot of times I think history can really like misconstrue fact, and I think history really shifts from generation to generation in our understanding of it.
Okay, just speak a bit louder, please, because we're not
Oh.
getting.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm really just wondering if you're finding younger generations interacting and engaging with the material and the memory of District 6
Yeah.
through the museum, and if it's and if you, in your belief, younger generations are really like capturing kind of like that spirit of revolution that you're touching upon a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to?
You heard? Yeah.
No,
question?
you
No,
want to-
I was just, the question is, are you finding with the younger generation that they're engaging with the District 6 Museum and its work and its story? Are they engaging in a way that actually feeds into a process of political change?
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's not only the younger generation coming to the museum. I think the younger generation throughout the whole country are seeing the wrongs that's being done. You must remember, what is so strange is that a lot of those people that's in Parliament had come out of those areas. And they ride past those areas with blinkers on because they're riding in their modern cars. And they move into areas, so-called white areas. They forget where they came from. They forget the conditions that people are living under because they're living the better life. Now that for me is a major problem. And many of our youngsters had died fighting for this country. Many of my friends had been incarcerated. Some of them never came out of imprisonment. And you ask yourself, but what has happened? Where is the freedom that people had asked for? And yet those people that are supposed to be our representative in Parliament are riding past those very same places they came out of. You mean to tell me they don't know what Langa looks inside, or what Guguletu looks like inside, or what happens up in the top part of the world? They know what it's like. Some of the roads are so bad. And they've been like that forever. There's no water. The pipes, it's actually quite sick. But the thing is that we've got to be looking, and the younger generation is looking at this. And hopefully when they get in, and they are talking about it, you can see them, and you could see them when Tom showed that one placard there. They are fed up. They are fed up with what is happening, and that's why they're having the placards up. So that is what we've got to be doing, and I hope that answers your question, that we are. And it's not only in the museum, it's what's got to be done overall. Not only in the museum, it's other areas as well that people have got to be speaking about and looking at what's happening and how we can overcome the problems that we are at the moment. And hopefully it'll pan out. And I say we have a lot of faith that it can be done, and it will be done. But it just might take a little time. But we've got a very, very beautiful country, as I say, a very rich country, a lot of minerals, a lot of arable land. We've got everything that we possibly need here. So why are we battling? But that is what we should be looking at. And hopefully that the generation will take over and start looking at it and developing in the proper way as it should be. Any other questions? Well.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. I'm really moved by that. That's a very impressive sense of community. Also, how you dealt that you managed to deal with the pain and the suffering from the eviction and everything. But my main question is about the future and what is being managed today. Between the museum and the local schools, for example, if there is any program connecting these two institutions, and also how can we deal with this new generation, since it's 30 years after apartheid. I know a lot of stuff still alive, but they didn't live through this period of time, so they are just like the second generation or even the third generation. So how can, what are the programs that you are dealing in connecting the schools with the museum? Since they were displaced, they are all over the place, I guess. So how do you manage to connect those people?
Okay, that's a very, very valid question. And as you said, they are probably the third generation, 2 generations down the road. How do you convince him? And the museum cannot be all over the show. And to bring the children to the museum is already a nightmare. Because especially coming from the poorer areas, just bringing the kids through to the museum, that means you have to get a bus. You have to then release teachers from teaching to get them to come to the museum with its schools. And in many cases, I mean, these kids are poor. They're hungry, you've got to give them something to eat as well. So that is not easy for the schools to come to the museum. I at one stage decided that I am going to take the museum to the schools. By this means, you can do that with your laptop. You can do it with the overhead projectors, which most of the schools have in any case. So you can get the whole school to come and watch. And it's not only done on the Cape Flats. It'll be done on both sides of the line because there's still the line that divides. Because your other side of the line should know what had gone through there. And that is what I'm trying to get them to get an understanding of, and getting more people to get the learning, to study about this, so that it won't be on me. Because I'll be, after 4 or 5 schools, I'll be a corpse. Because there's so many schools you've got to be dealing with. But the museum is doing a big job, a good job, in getting across to those, and we're teaching the youngsters to let them know why they are, where they are. That's a big problem, because a lot of them haven't got a clue. Because remember that their parents or their grandparents never spoke about it. It's almost as if they're too shy, that they never stood up for their rights. But what the kids don't understand, that the army, the police, the navy, all the armed forces were in the hands of this so-called white man. And the minute you stood up to them, you became a communist. You became a dissident. You could be picked up, you could be locked away. They don't have to worry with a case of yours. You could land on Robben Island. And that is the situation that you find yourselves in. And a lot of the kids stood up, and as I said, I'd seen them being shot with birdshot. I've been there with the tear gas was there. I must give another story also. I was sitting in my office in Manenberg. That's where my head office was, my office. And once again, the medical officer of health on the phone, scalpel 1. Scalpel 6 is scalpel 1, and I thought, oh, here we go again. I've just been told there's some bodies in Gugulethu. I said, bodies in Gugulethu? He says, yes. Will you please go and check it out? So I decided, okay, now I knew the area well, so I didn't go the normal way where they go. I went around the back ways, and as I'm coming up a bridge, as I'm coming on top of the bridge, the next minute, you get 4 soldiers jumping out with FN rifles. Now you'll never realize how big a barrel of a gun can look until it's pointed at your head. Here were 4 of them pointing at my head. And they wanted to know, all in Afrikaans, what are you doing here? So of course, again, I said, I happen to work here. What are you doing here? Still very stroppy. And then by that time, of course, the corporal, the sergeant also came up and wanted to know who I am. So I said, look, I'm the health inspector. I've just been informed by, but then the radio goes off again. Now I can imagine at the very wrong time. These guys are already sweating, they're standing with guns, and I think if anybody had just clapped, I could have been shot. And the radio goes off. I said, can I just answer this? That's a medical officer of health. He says, okay, answer it. I said, scalpel 1. This is scalpel 6. He says, are you okay? Click. If you don't hear from me in the next 5 minutes, you'll know I'm not okay. Click. What's happening? So I said, well, I've just been confronted here by some soldiers here, and apparently there's been some terrorists that were shot and killed. So he said, I suggest you get out of there. So then, of course, I'm very curious. I said, what are they meaning by terrorists? So they said, well, they shot about 7 terrorists. And I looked at this lot and I think, you're talking a lot of rubbish to me. But in any case, left. And what had happened was, there were some youngsters who were going to work, look for work. They got the intel all wrong, the information all wrong. These guys shot and killed those youngsters without them even having a shot in. They were just shot and killed. And because they realized their mistake, and I believe they planted guns. So suddenly these are terrorists. But that all came out in the washing afterwards. But none of those people were ever caught up for it. There's a big monument there to the Gugulethu 7 in Gugulethu. But none of the people was responsible for that killing has ever appeared. Because it's just washed under the carpet. Now that's the reality of what we had to go through in those days, in the apartheid years, in wanting to just to find work. I mean, I went through that. I mean, just going to go for an interview, and suddenly you landed, could almost landed in jail for going for the interview, unfortunately. And it's just hopefully that will all change and things will change and we will be able to live the life that we're supposed to have gotten after all this and the euphoria of 1994. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Alon Morgan, and again, thank you for this presentation. I feel like everybody's been thank you every single moment.
Okay,
so.
thank you.
For my class, for my studio class, we are taking Issa Wolf. She's a South African architect, and she does a lot of activism through her work. And we just came from Cape Town just a few weeks ago, and we have to say it was just so beautiful. But what's really fascinating that I have observed is that since the District 6 is it's being not troubled, but trying to find ways to utilize it, I found that every beginning of Thursdays in Cape Town, they usually have gallery openings and events and stuff in the center of the city. I'm very curious of how artists in Cape Town using their form of activism or connecting to District 6 Memorial in a way that will share light or reveal or somehow of like making more a conversation interaction with the public as well as District 6 and its memories and history. So I'm curious if there's these political events or just how activism's actually pushing forth of like, okay, let's spark this conversation, because like the woman in the back mentioned, like each and every generation do forget or have their connections with certain sites or location disconnect at times. So it's always of exercise of threading that connection again. So I'm curious if activism, art, or that first Thursday is pushing forth of.
Well, I think that the activism is coming through the younger generation, our universities. They are raising their voices, they're making their voices heard. And you'll see in many universities where they're having this argument with officials, because they want to know, they want answers for all this. And even when they have the various, at the moment, every political party has got something. And the promises they make, oh my boy. Jeez, like when I listened to all that, I thought to myself, where are you coming from? Where are you going to get all those things that you're telling those people that you're going to be happening? And you listen to them, all the promises. And I think the moment you get into position of power, are you going to carry that out? But I think our younger generation is not falling for this kind of thing anymore. I mean, even the older generation, one lady, when they came to get she told him, well, you just bugger off. I've been voting for the last 3 or 4 generations, and nothing has changed. It's gone worse. So just move off, and people don't want to vote either. That's the sort of thing that people feel. It's your younger generation now that's could take over the baton and run with it. Because it's their future that's at stake. I'm not like Methuselah, I can't live for another 200 years. So I've had my run and I'm done. So they've got to take over this and then take it further. Because it's for them. We fought the fight up till now. They've got to take it further and get that freedom that we're supposed to have been, that we had fought for. That is all I can tell those younger generation.
You're not done yet, I hope.
No, actually, that's becoming very tight.
Yeah. Organized around Dollar Brand's music. I don't know if you want to share any more memories of.
Dollar Brand, of course. As I said, I'm caught up with all the musicians in Cape Town, or most of them. So Dollar Brand, and he came over here, and one of his famous ones in Cape Town was called Manenberg, which was done actually by saxophonist Basil Coetzee. And they did the Manenberg thing, and that put him on the map, the world map. And of course, his wife Satima B. Benjamin to us, and also personal friends. She was a vocalist, and they all came over to make their fortune. It was a bit difficult for them to get into music because, I mean, coming to States with Cape Town music is a bit difficult. And but eventually they broke into the market, and he's got a couple of LPs. Well, that time was LPs. Now it's of course CDs and stuff like that. Oh, well, it's now
Streaming.
It's streaming
Yeah.
now as well. You don't have to worry that. Yeah. So we have that type of thing going on every Monday. I am at the jam session, which is called Fat Addies. Monday nights we have a lot of jam sessions. I'm surprised. I mean, this is New York, and I don't find one jam session. I was thinking to myself, this is music. Where's the music? They say the Apollo Theater's closed down.
It's $100 to get into the Blue Note.
$100 in the Blue Note. You know what $100 is to be? I could buy Mercedes Benz. But that problem is everything is so expensive. I love my jazz, but unfortunately, I won't be able to see it. I can't get there. It's too expensive for us to get there. And but in Cape Town, you have free jam sessions. And if you're a musician, you're welcome to come on stage and come and jam with the guys, which should have been done here. There's such a lot of musicians, there's students who would love to play with a band that should be given the opportunity. But are they given the opportunity? I don't think so. So they should be having jam sessions. Do you think I should come over here and start a jam session?
If we have any musicians and a piano, let's go.
Promise you, we'll get them up so quickly to play at various venues. And then the venues will start getting capital because more people will attend, and your students will get exposure. So music will carry on. You'll get your more Quincy Joneses coming through. You'll get more of your Oscar Petersons coming through. You'll get more of those coming through because they are there, but they haven't got the platform. And we should be seeing how you can do it. And I was quite shocked. I mean, let's face it. When I came in, I wanted to know, where can we go for music? Oh, and I heard the prices. I said, oh, no, forget it. But this is the reality. So that's your job. You brought it up. You started. You start looking at that and get the music. How do you keep the music playing? Very easily. That is what we're going to do. Any other questions? No.
Okay. So I do believe there's food outside the room in that corridor out there, which you're all welcome to come and eat and talk to Joe. And in the meantime, thank you for coming all this way and for speaking to us this evening.
And of course,
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Once again, my mentor.
Other
Those
way
in the
around.
deep
Other
end.
way around.
But thank you all for coming. And I hope that the live streamers have got something out of it. I'll probably be crucified by the time I get home again, but okay. It's part of my life. But the thing is that we've got to ring the changes, all of us. We've got one little world that we're certain of, and we've got to try and make it to the best of our ability, how we can get it going. So thanks very much, each and everyone, for coming here this evening.